Y'all know what's going on. It's time for another episode of Doing Time with Joe. I'm your host, Joe Bacon. Welcome to the show, y'all. Some stories in here start with greed, some start with pride. This one starts with love. A twisted, desperate kind of love. The kind that will make a good man do a very, very bad thing. His name was Marcus, and he wasn't a gangster, he wasn't a hustler. He was a father. And his daughter, a little 7-year-old girl named Ava, was the center of his whole world. She had his smile and a laugh that could make the whole room feel warm. She also had a sickness in her lungs, a severe case of asthma that sometimes in the middle of the night would steal her breath away. The medicine was expensive. The doctor's visits were expensive. And Marcus had just lost his job at the factory. He was a proud man, a man who believed in a hard day's work, but there was no work to be found. And the bills were piling up like a slow, suffocating snowstorm. He was drowning. He watched his little girl, her small body struggling for air, and he felt a kind of desperation that was a physical pain. He would have done anything to help her, anything. And in that desperation, a dark seed was planted. An old friend from the neighborhood, a dude still in the life, saw the fear in Marcus's eyes, and he offered him a solution, a shortcut. There's easy money out there, man, he said. You just got to be willing to take it. He was talking about burglary, hitting a nice house in the suburbs. They got insurance, he said. Nobody gets hurt. Marcus refused at first, and he was a working man, not a thief. But then Ava had another attack, a bad one that landed her in the emergency room. And the bill for that one night, it was more than he had made in a month. The desperation turned to a cold, hard resolve. He was going to do it. He chose a house in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood on the other side of town, the Miller's house. He had seen them, a happy family, a husband, a wife, 2 kids. He had seen the new car in their driveway, the fancy grill on their back porch. He told himself they could afford it. He told himself it was a victimless crime. He checked their mail, saw a postcard from Florida. They were on vacation, he thought. The house was empty. It was the perfect score. A quick in and out. Enough money to get his daughter the care she needed. He was doing it for her. That was the lie he told himself. The lie that allowed him to become a monster. The night he did it, the moon was a thin silver sliver in the sky. He wore a black ski mask, gloves, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He broke a small window in the back of the house, slipped inside. The house was quiet, still. He moved through the dark rooms like a ghost, his flashlight beam dancing over the evidence of a happy life. Family photos on the wall, kids' drawings on the fridge. For a moment, the guilt was so strong, he almost turned back. But then he thought of Ava, of her small, struggling breaths, and he kept going. He was in the master bedroom stuffing jewelry from a small wooden box into his bag when he heard it, a floorboard creaking upstairs. He froze. His blood turned to ice. They weren't on vacation. They were home. The perfect score had just turned into a nightmare. He was no longer just a burglar. He was an intruder, a threat. And he knew with a sickening certainty that this night was going to end in a way that would leave scars on them all, scars that would never, ever heal. The sound of the floorboard creaking upstairs was the sound of Marcus's world collapsing. Panic, cold and sharp, seized him. His plan had been simple. Get in, get the stuff, get out. There was no plan for this, no plan for a family asleep in their beds. His first instinct was to run, just drop the bag and get out, disappear back into the night. But as he turned to go, he heard a man's voice thick with sleep. "Honey, did you hear that?" And then the sound of footsteps. Someone was coming downstairs. Marcus was trapped. He dove behind a large, overstuffed armchair in the corner of the living room, his heart a wild, frantic bird in his chest. He held his breath, praying to a God he hadn't spoken to in years. Please just let him go back to bed. But Mr. Miller didn't go back to bed. He came down the stairs, a baseball bat held tight in his hands. He was just a regular guy in his pajamas and a father protecting his home. He flipped on a lamp. The room was flooded with a soft, warm light. Marcus's heart stopped. He was visible. There was no hiding. Mr. Miller saw him. His eyes went wide, a mix of fear and a fierce, protective anger. "Who the hell are you?" he said, his voice a low growl. "Get out of my house." Marcus stood up slowly, his hands raised. The ski mask felt hot, suffocating. "I don't want any trouble," he said, his voice a muffled rasp. "I'm just leaving." But in that moment, a woman screamed from the top of the stairs, "Mrs. Miller." And then the sound of children crying. The whole house was awake now. And the quiet, simple burglar had just turned into a hostage situation. Mr. Miller's face hardened. "You're not going anywhere," he said, taking a step forward, the bat raised. And Marcus, in his terror, did the one thing he had sworn to himself he wouldn't do. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small, cheap pistol he had brought, just in case the sight of the gun changed everything. The anger in Mr. Miller's eyes was replaced by a pure animal fear. "Okay," he said, lowering the bat. "Okay, man. Just be cool." "Get him down here," Marcus said, his own voice sounding like a stranger's. "Get your family down here." Now, what happened next was a blur of trauma and terror. He herded the family into the living room, the two small children clinging to their mother, their faces streaked with tears. He was no longer just a man trying to pay his daughter's medical bills. He was a monster, a villain in a story he had never intended to write. He tied them up with lamp cords, his hands shaking so badly he could barely make the knots. He took their wallets, their phones, the small amount of cash they had in the house. He just wanted to be gone. But he knew he couldn't just leave them there. They would call the cops. So he did the last and most desperate thing he could think of. He took the keys to their car. As he was backing out of the driveway, he looked back at the house, at the warm light spilling from the living room window. He had gone in there a man. He was leaving a ghost, haunted by the terrified faces of a family whose lives he had just shattered. He had gotten the money, but he had lost something far more valuable, in a piece of his own soul. And he knew, as he sped off into the night, that he would be paying for this one single stupid mistake for the rest of his life. The drive away from the Miller's house was a frantic, desperate flight. Marcus drove for hours with no destination in mind, just a blind animal need to put as much distance as possible between himself and the wreckage he had left behind. The faces of the Miller family were burned into his memory, the sound of the children's crying a constant, tormenting echo in his ears. He finally ditched the car in a parking lot 2 states away and took a bus back to his city. He slipped back into his life like a ghost, but everything was different now. The world was sharper, more dangerous. Every passing cop car was a potential threat. Every knock on the door sent a jolt of panic through him. He was a hunted man. He sold the jewelry he had stolen, and for a few weeks the money was a balm on his raw nerves. He paid the medical bills, he bought groceries, and he took Ava to the park, pushed her on the swings of a desperate, frantic attempt to feel like a normal father again. But he wasn't. He was a man with a dark and terrible secret. And it was a secret that was eating him alive. Meanwhile, for the Miller family, the nightmare was just beginning. The police came, the detectives, the forensics team. Their home, their sanctuary was turned into a crime scene. They had to answer questions, relive the terror over and over again. The physical bonds were cut in a few hours, but the psychological ones, they were a different story. Their sense of safety was shattered. Their home was no longer a refuge, it was a place of violation. The children had nightmares, they were afraid of the dark. Mrs. Miller couldn't sleep. She would wake up at the smallest sound, her heart pounding, and Mr. Miller, who had tried so hard to be the protector, was consumed by a feeling of helpless rage and a profound and unshakable guilt. They were a family that had been broken, not by a physical blow, but by the violation of their most sacred space. The scars of that night were invisible, but they were deep. And they knew, with a weary sadness, that they would be living with them for the rest of their lives. The police investigation was a slow and methodical process. They had the stolen car, they had fingerprints from the house, they had a description of the intruder. It was only a matter of time. The end came for Marcus on a quiet Tuesday morning. He was at home making breakfast for Ava. The knock on the door was a polite, almost gentle sound, but when he opened it, he was met with the hard, uncompromising faces of two detectives. They didn't have to say a word. He knew. He looked over at his daughter, sitting at the table, a milk mustache on her upper lip. And in that moment, the full devastating weight of his choices crashed down on him. He had done this for her, to save her. But in the end, he had just created another kind of sickness. A sickness of loss, of abandonment of a father who was about to be a ghost. As they led him away in cuffs, his daughter's confused and terrified cries were the final and most brutal judgment on a good man who had made a catastrophic and unforgivable mistake. The legal process was a slow, grinding machine, and Marcus was just another piece of meat being fed into it. He sat in the county jail, the weight of his guilt, a physical thing crushing the air from his lungs. He confessed to everything. He didn't want to fight it. He just wanted it to be over. His wife, who had stood by him through the unemployment, the desperation, was shattered. The man she had married, the good, proud man, was a violent criminal. The lie was too big, the betrayal too deep. She told him she was filing for a divorce. He didn't blame her. The Miller family was at every court hearing. They sat in the front row, a silent, unified front of grief and anger. Marcus couldn't bring himself to look at them. The shame was too great. He pled guilty. At his sentencing, he was given the chance to speak. He stood up, his hands shaking, and for the first time he looked directly at the Millers. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice a raw, broken whisper. "I know that word is useless, but it's all I have, and I was a desperate man, and I did a monstrous thing, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to atone for the pain I have caused you." His words didn't change anything. The judge sentenced him to 20 years. Armed robbery, kidnapping, home invasion. The gavel fell, and his life as he knew it was over. He was sent to the state penitentiary, a place filled with men who were far harder, more violent than he was. He was a fish out of water, a quiet, remorseful man in a sea of predators. He did his time, the days bleeding into one another, a gray, featureless landscape of regret. And on the outside, two families were serving a life sentence of their own. The Millers, who were struggling to rebuild their sense of safety, to heal the invisible wounds of their trauma. And Marcus's own daughter, Ava, who was now the child of a violent felon, a girl who would have to grow up with the stigma, the shame of her father's choices. And this is the story that we don't often talk about. We talk about the criminals. We talk about the victims, but we don't talk about the other victims, the families of the incarcerated, the children who are left behind to carry the weight of a legacy they didn't create. They are the silent, invisible casualties of crime. And their sentence is often the longest and most painful of all. Years in prison have a way of changing a man. For Marcus, the change was a slow, painful, and profound one. He spent the first few years in a fog of guilt and self-loathing. But slowly, with the help of a prison chaplain and a support group, he started to find a way to live with the ghost of the man he had been. He got his GED, he enrolled in college courses, and he became a mentor to the younger inmates. A cautionary tale, a voice of reason in the chaos. He used his own story to try and steer them away from the path he had taken. He wasn't trying to find redemption. He was just trying to balance the scales one small act of good at a time. He and his daughter Ava started to write to each other. Their letters were a slow, careful dance of reconnection. She was a young woman now, and she was wrestling with her own legacy of pain. She told him about the anger, the shame, the questions that haunted her. And he listened. He didn't make excuses. He just listened. And in that shared, honest space, a fragile and beautiful new relationship began to grow. On the outside, the Miller family was on its own journey of healing. They went to therapy. They moved to a new house. The scars of that night would never completely fade, but they were learning to live with them. They were a family of survivors bound together by their shared trauma and their fierce and unwavering love for each other. After 12 years, Marcus came up for parole. He walked into that hearing room a different man. The desperation was gone, replaced by a quiet and profound sense of peace. He knew he would carry the weight of what he had done for the rest of his life, but he also knew that he was more than his worst mistake. A letter was read at his hearing. A letter from the Miller family. They did not forgive him, but they did not oppose his release. We believe that he has paid his debt to society, the letter said. And we hope that he can find a way to live a life of amends. We choose to let go of the anger. We choose to move forward, and we choose to heal. It was an act of grace so profound, it took Marcus's breath away. He was granted parole. He walked out of those gates an old man, his youth a ghost he had left behind in a concrete box. He dedicated the rest of his life to working with the families of inmates, to building bridges across the chasms of pain and anger that crime creates. He had gone into that house a desperate man, and he had become a monster. But in the long, slow, and painful years that followed, he had found a way to become a man again. A man who had learned that the only way to heal his own wounds is to dedicate his life to healing the wounds of others. A man who had learned that the only true freedom is the freedom from the prison of our own pasts. This has been another episode of Doing Time with Joe. I'm your host, Joe Baker, and I say peace, y'all.